Coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon, state prosecutors arrest 3 incumbent lawmakers as the Park Geun-hye administration steps up its drive to stamp out irregularities in the public sector. 2 U.S. aid workers who contracted Ebola in Liberia are declared virus-free and discharged from hospital, raising hopes that an effective treatment may have been found. First, the U.S. defense chief says Washington is pursuing a long-term strategy against Islamic State militants, calling them a group even more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's new Friday, August 22nd here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ojin Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. On this Friday, I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this lunchtime as the political standoff continues over a bill to launch an extensive probe into April's ferry sinking. The National Assembly has been shaken by the arrest late Thursday night of 3 lawmakers on corruption charges.
Now, the arrests are the first since the government launched a campaign to root out corruption in the wake of the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. Myung-kil has more.
3 out of 5 lawmakers wanted on corruption and election law violation charges were arrested late Thursday, minutes before the National Assembly was called in to an extra session at midnight that would have given them immunity from arrest. The lawmakers who were arrested are main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy representative Kim Jae-yun and ruling Saenuri Party representatives Hyun-yong and Sang-eun. However, a local court rejected the prosecution's request to arrest 2 other lawmakers from the main opposition party. Kim Jae-yun is charged with taking up to around $50,000 in bribes from the head of a Seoul vocational school in return for favors in getting legislation passed. The ruling party's Hyun-yong is suspected of taking bribes worth more than $150,000 from a railway parts supplier in return for awarding the firm private company contracts since August 2008. Sang-eun has been under suspicion of taking nearly $600,000 from his former company in violation of the political funding law and covering up his illegal funds. Advocates of the government's anti-corruption drive say these arrests show the government is more than willing to track down cases of corruption and punish those involved. The government pledged to eradicate corruption in the wake of April's ferry accident, as it was found that corrupt and collusive ties between government officials and businesses played a large role in the sinking. It's a double-edged sword, though. If these lawmakers are found guilty, it'll show that representatives in the National Assembly have taken large sums of money from people, organizations, and private companies in return for influence in Parliament. Myung-kil, Arirang News.
And another extraordinary session begins today at the National Assembly with the hopes of reaching a compromise on the hotly debated bill on the Sewol-ho ferry disaster that has held up parliamentary business for weeks. The main opposition party, which sponsored the bill, is hoping to get it passed as soon as possible, but is still fighting opposition from the families of the victims of April's ferry sinking, who have rejected the latest bipartisan agreement. Meanwhile, the rival parties are seeking to pass urgent bills that have been sitting idle for months due to the delay in this ferry bill and fix the dates of the next parliamentary audit of government offices. And on to some hopeful news regarding the Ebola outbreak. The 2 Americans who had contracted the deadly virus in Liberia have survived and are now both out of the hospital. Doctors have assured the public that they're clear of Ebola and no longer pose a threat. Connie Lee has the story.
2 U.S. aid workers are now clear of the Ebola virus. Dr. Kent Brantley and Nancy Ripple have been released from Emory University Hospital in Atlanta after spending nearly 3 weeks in isolation.
Today is a miraculous day.
Dr. Brantley, with the medical team that treated him, was greeted with applause at a news conference on Thursday, the day of his release.
I'm thrilled to be alive, to be well, and to be reunited with my family.
Nancy Wrightbull was quietly released from the hospital on Tuesday. Doctors say the patients went through rigorous treatment and testing with the experimental drug called ZMapp. And according to the doctors, they now pose no risk to the public.
The medical staff here at Emory is confident that the discharge from the hospital of both of these patients poses no public health threat.
The two Americans were both missionaries working in an Ebola ward in Liberia when they were infected with the virus. Soon after, they were flown from Liberia to the hospital in the United States, making them the first human patients with Ebola to ever come into the country. These two may have survived, but the outbreak continues to take a toll. The World Health Organization says more than 2,400 people have been infected, and more than 1,300 people have died since the outbreak was first found in West Africa back in March. So there's a continued plea to help stop the ongoing outbreak.
I am forever thankful to God for sparing my life. Please continue to pray for Liberia and the people of West Africa.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Reports of hate speech against Koreans living in Japan have come to the attention of a UN committee which is determining whether the country violated an international convention on racial discrimination. Japan has yet to give a concrete answer. Kim Jae-yun reports.
The United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination has begun a review of concerns about hate speech against Koreans residing in Japan, to determine if the country has violated the international convention aimed at eliminating racial discrimination. The review comes amid reports of anti-Korean protests on the streets of Japan, as Korea and Japan are dealing with tense diplomatic relations over historical issues. The committee has expressed particular concern about reports of a right-wing group that was said to have used racially derogatory terms against Korean residents in Japan. The committee has also urged the Japanese government to pass a new bill to bring its laws into line with the convention. Although Japan is party to the convention, it does not have a law that bans racial discrimination, including hate speech. Korean nationals in Japan say there is an urgent need for a new policy, as their rights are being violated.
Our biggest goal for the Japanese government is to pass a bill banning racial discrimination.
Tokyo says it must first determine whether a new policy would conflict with its freedom of speech laws. The International Convention took effect in 1969 and it requires parties to outlaw hate speech. Kim Jae-yun, Arirang News.
A high-ranking U.S. Treasury official is seeking Korea's cooperation over U.S.-led efforts to impose tough sanctions on Russia for its interference in Ukraine. The official, who asked not to be named, told reporters in Seoul on Thursday that he believes Korean firms and banks got the message that they would not backfill any opportunities on the sanctions imposed on Russia by the U.S. and the European Union. The official called for unified efforts against Russia. Meanwhile, the U.S. Treasury's point man on sanctions, David Cohen, who is currently in Seoul for talks on North Korea sanctions, said he had a very good meeting with local senior diplomats. He added that they also talked about joint efforts to sanction Iran for its nuclear weapons development. Now, when we think of unification, we normally think of the South Korean government's efforts, but it's not just them who are preparing for hopefully a peaceful reunification of the two Koreas, because the Federation of Korean Industries has set up its own Unification Economic Committee comprised of leading CEOs and other experts. The group will offer ideas and advice regarding policies on reunification and establish a master plan for North Korea's economic development. The head of the committee said it's time that industries drive Pyongyang's industrialization effectively, marking the first time in 9 years that this South Korean Federation is involving itself in unification-related work. Now, since the opening of their diplomatic ties 22 years ago, China has become Korea's biggest trading partner, while Korea stands as China's fourth largest. But a recent drop in Korea's exports to China is ringing some alarm bells here in Seoul. Our Hwang Ji-ae tells us more about the challenges, but also the future direction of this extremely important economic partnership.
In a little over 2 decades, Korea and China saw their trade volume increase 35-fold to over $220 billion. Now, China is Korea's biggest trading partner in terms of imports and exports, exceeding the United States and Japan and taking up more than a quarter of Korea's total exports. Korea is also China's 4th largest trading partner. But a recent slump in Korea's shipments to China that plunged 7% in July, marking the 3rd straight month of decline, point to some challenges ahead.
The drop is coming from the slide in Chinese outbound shipments as Korean firms largely export intermediary goods to China. But aside from this kind of temporary reason, Chinese firms are now improving their own supply capacity as well.
Adding that old business strategies will no longer sustain shipments to China, experts say the focus should now be on producing high-quality finished goods. The Korean government is also joining efforts to sustain trade flows that make up half of the nation's output. Earlier this week, President Park Geun-hye asked Jack Ma, the executive chairman of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba, to help Korea's small and medium-sized enterprises expand into China's online market. Still, there are opportunities that could lead to a pickup in exports to China.
Negotiations for the Korea-China Free Trade Agreement are in the final stages, and the deal is expected to take effect as early as next year. The trade pact could boost exports to China.
Experts at the popularity of Korean television soap operas and films in China will make it easier for local exporters to overcome uncertainties in the world's 2nd biggest economy. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
Now it's time for a look through some of the other international headlines we're following at this hour on this Friday lunchtime. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, we heard from America's defense chief a few hours ago that the U.S. will stick to its commitment to bring Islamic State militants to justice.
Indeed, he also defended an earlier failed mission by the Pentagon aimed at rescuing American hostages held by the group this last month. Our Son Jung-in has the story.
Addressing the worsening security situation in Iraq and Syria, U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said the militant Islamic State group is beyond anything they've seen. Speaking to reporters at a Pentagon briefing on Thursday, Hagel said he assessed the group, also known as ISIL and ISIS, as elaborate with good financial support.
ISIL is as sophisticated and well-funded as any group that we have seen. They're beyond just a terrorist group.
Along with Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Martin Dempsey, Hagel stressed that U.S. military involvement in Iraq will continue with the help of other allies, as the long-term threat from IS is more dangerous than that of any other terrorist group. He noted that combating the militant group will ultimately require political reform in Iraq, but added that it is possible to contain them as the group seems to have lost momentum. He also said IS would eventually have to be defeated. Regarding the mission to rescue American hostages, including journalist James Foley, who was captured by the group last month, Dempsey defended the operation, describing it as flawless. He said they failed to recover the hostages because they had been moved to a different area. The officials said the U.S. will not relent in their efforts to bring their citizens home and their captors to justice. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Missouri Governor Jay Nixon has ordered a systematic withdrawal of the National Guard, who were deployed Monday, citing the considerable decline in violence in Ferguson. Early Thursday morning local time, Highway Patrol Captain Ron Johnson told reporters Wednesday had been a very good night, with only 6 arrests compared to the 47 the night before, and no Molotov cocktails, fires, or shootings. Meanwhile, pressure is growing for the lead prosecutor in the Michael Brown shooting investigation to be replaced. He is viewed by some to be potentially biased, given that several members of his family worked for St. Louis police and his father was killed by an African-American suspect. There are also calls to charge Darren Wilson, the police officer who shot Brown in the killing. A grand jury has begun considering evidence, a process which could take several weeks. The number of missing in Japan's massive landslides that leveled a village near Hiroshima City has grown significantly. According to local dailies Asahi Shimbun and Yomiuri Shimbun, local police say they were now searching for 51 people, up from the 7 reported missing earlier. Among those affected was a Korean couple in their 70s. One was killed and the other seriously wounded after being caught in the landslides. Seoul's foreign ministry has extended its condolences also to Japan. Record rains had poured on Hiroshima Prefecture earlier this week. Japan's weather agency said the deluge amounted to a month's worth of rain that fell in the 24 hours leading up to Wednesday morning. And a couple of leadership changes to tell you about in Southeast Asia. Jakarta's top court upheld Joko Widodo as the winner of last month's presidential election in Indonesia. The move rejects an appeal filed by supporters of defeated candidate Prabowo Subianto, who had claimed voter fraud. Subianto's team said they will accept the ruling of the Constitutional Court. And in Thailand, General Prayut Chan-o-cha has been named the country's new prime minister. The 60-year-old had served as the de facto ruler after leading the bloodless coup against former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra back in May. The parliamentary vote that confirmed the transition was swift, taking just 15 minutes. The ballot 191 to 194.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju with Pro.
Market researcher, strategy analytics said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about 11.1.
Samsung and LG televisions have tied for the top spot on a list of best TVs by an independent New York-based audio-video retailer. Samsung's PDP Plasma series and LG's new 55-inch OLED TV were chosen as having the best picture quality in value electronics TV shootout, judged by a panel of industry experts and consumers. In more good news for the Korean electronics giant, Samsung Electronics says that its flat-screen TVs have topped the global market for the 34th consecutive quarter in the April to June period, with a market share of 32%. President Park Geun-hye has vowed to foster Korea's southeastern port city of Busan as a financial hub that specializes in marine and shipping finance and derivatives. The president made this comment this morning at a ceremony marking the completion of the Busan International Finance Center. The city's 63-story landmark will house 6 public institutions, including the Korea Exchange, as well as a guarantee agency for shipping companies. Carrying on with her economic revitalization drive, President Park has been meeting with the heads of Busan's small and mid-sized businesses, promising to help them innovate projects and expand overseas by breaking financial institutions' protectionism.
Now, it goes without saying that when you are pregnant, you should be extremely cautious about what you eat and drink. And a new report is warning women that are expecting to avoid eating tuna, and that includes the canned varieties. American magazine Consumer Reports cited the relatively high levels of mercury contained in the fish as the reasons for its warning. Almost all seafood contains mercury to varying degrees, but too much can cause damage to the brain and the nervous system, and fetuses and children are especially vulnerable. Along with recommending that pregnant women avoid tuna, Consumer Reports also says that everyone really should limit their tuna consumption based on their weight. The National Fisheries Institute in the US, which represents seafood companies and restaurants, questions the magazine's claims, saying it was not a thorough or balanced examination. Now, in cultural news, Korea's leading orchestra, the Seoul Philharmonic, has kicked off its European tour in style in Finland. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won is traveling with them, and she filed this report.
Finland's oldest city, Turku, was once the capital of the country until the early 19th century. The city is known for both historic and natural attractions. And every summer, the city boasts another important tourist attraction, the Turku Music Festival, the oldest classical music festival in the northern European country. And it's here where Korea's leading orchestra, the Seoul Philharmonic, begins its European tour as one of dozens of international guest artists invited by the annual music event, now in its 55th year.
Seoul Philharmonic is one of the best orchestras in Asia, and as you know, Maestro Chung will make his debut, long-awaited debut, in Finland. He is one of the greatest conductors of our time, so this was obviously something that we wanted to offer to our public.
The orchestra opens the stage with Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 3, followed by Debussy's La Mer and Ravel's La Valse, led by Maestro Jung Myung-hoon.
As far as the repertoire is concerned, we try to give a good balance of works, classical, romantic, contemporary, so it shows the versatility of the orchestra.
Audience members raved about the performance by one of Asia's top orchestras, which traveled a very long way to take the stage.
First of all, I want to say it was beyond words. It was so good. It's awesome. I mean, it was once in a lifetime you get to experience something that's perfect.
I would like to go after then when they're going to have next concert wherever they have it. They were so fantastic.
The Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra will continue their tour with performances to be held in Austria, Italy, and Great Britain. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, Turku.
Now, the Korean period blockbuster Roaring Currents is smashing record after record in the domestic box office charts. The film, about Korea's most astonishing military victory over the Japanese by Admiral Lee Sun-shin, has attracted more than 15 million cinema goers, and that's roughly a third of the country's entire population. The overwhelming success of this movie is also driving sales of books and other products about Korea's most revered seamen. Our Shin Se-min reports.
Over 15 million tickets sold and still counting. Sailing past the all-time earnings champion Avatar, which racked in $122 million in the Korean market in 2009, the homegrown film Roaring Currents is looking to set a milestone that's never been reached. Choi Min-sik, who played Admiral Lee Sun-shin in the period film, says he still can't fully digest all the attention.
This is all surreal to me. I'm glad that the movie was able to open up ground that allows different generations to come together.
Korea's most watched movie of all time hasn't just been a hit on the silver screens. The craze has permeated into other industries, leading to increased sales of books and even modules related to Admiral Lee.
Miniatures of the battleship used during the battle have tripled the sales in this particular action figure store, and interest is growing.
Watching the film has broadened my view, and these replica figures and even unknown books on Admiral Yi now catch my attention.
Biography and non-fiction titles are also feeling the boom. More readers are looking for books on Korea's most famous admiral, and according to Kobo Bookstore, the number of books sold have surged sixfold compared to the same period last year. And as to why all this interest is being garnered, movie critic Chun Chan-il says the element and timing of the movie's release lent to its success.
The fact that there isn't a firm role model like Admiral Lee in the nation is eventually coming to light through the popularity of this movie. It means that many people are wanting to rest and lean on such leadership that's shown by the character.
Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Well, finally, we are getting some relief from the rain today. Even the sun is out from behind the clouds. So as we can see, it's looking quite clear across the nation. But a bit of fog is still blocking the sun. But under dry and mostly to partly sunny skies, temperatures are expected to rise today, as the top temperatures will be about 3 to 4 degrees higher than yesterday. So let's take a closer look. The afternoon high in the capital will make it to 28, while Daegu will rise to 30, and Gwangju and Busan will climb to 29 this afternoon. And for other regions, Jeju Island will get up to 27, Daejeon will top out at 29, and Dokdo should see highs of 23. And the weather outlook for this weekend is also looking good. Skies will continue to be mostly to partly sunny through the weekend here in the capital, and temperatures will be rising to near 30 degrees Celsius. So if you have any plans for outdoor activities, the weather won't bother you. So go ahead and enjoy it. That's all from me this week, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks very much, Jion, for the weather there. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Newsline at Noon.
Have a great weekend. Mark and I will be back on Monday.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye.